The chair recognizes the gentleman from Van Buren, Representative Shipley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House, it's an honor to be with you today and talk about and deliberate such important matters. There's been some great discussion on this bill. A lot of important things have been said. And thank you, Representative McClintock, for your comments. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the members of law enforcement in this chamber end up voting or not voting on this bill tonight. That'll be very interesting to see. I understand and recognize the urgent need to support the men and women of law enforcement. I lived that urgent need last summer. I was talking with a friend this last weekend, and I still have traumatic feelings from last year when the rioters came to the Capitol, when I was threatened with violence, ridiculed, cyberbullied on social media, threatened again. And I just remember all that happening, and I remember my heart crying with gratitude for the law enforcement that stood there at the Capitol, that we could do our job seriously, or do our job effectively, or just do our job in general without rioters disrupting our work. But it was also with the grief that my heart cried that good men and women sworn to protect and serve could be treated so disrespectfully. It's one reason I believe it's always of paramount importance to immediately and always denounce violence. And further, why public institutions that are promoting, condoning, aiding, and abetting riotous behavior must be sternly and quickly corrected. I think some of the actions we've taken this legislative session might be a step in that right direction. But I think it's also important to acknowledge the reality, and at least when I was standing there, that there was something that was attempting to be communicated, even though it was coming out in a very ugly, angry, violent way that terrified me. But I acknowledge that the riot is the language of the unheard. I think that's a true statement that lives in American history. And I think there are reasons why so many misguided youth were attracted to the trouble of last summer, is because there are perceived grievances and perhaps legitimate grievances that would be addressed. I think we spoke before that in our country, in our nation, in the state of Iowa, in our nation's history, there are times when injustice occurs. There are times when injustice exists systemically, where injustices must be acknowledged, addressed, corrected, and never again repeated. We must always strive to be a source of healing in this broken world of ours, and our criminal systems, our prisons, our social services, our welfare are in need of serious, serious healing. And I believe that the state of Iowa will best protect itself from violent riots when the state of Iowa takes a deep breath to listen and learn from the language of the unheard. And yes, absolutely, through this healing process, through these generational traumas and pains that have existed in our nation for centuries, our men and women of law enforcement will be supported, respected, and cherished every single step of the way. There are a lot of pieces in this bill I think we'd all love to see enacted. Unfortunately, I won't be able to offer my support on the final version of the bill tonight. For me personally, I think the language that stuck out is most important. I'm very supportive of the language in this bill, which gives some legal grace to motorists when being dangerously mobbed by an unlawful assembly. I think that's a great thing that I think will be wonderful to have enacted. But overall, I think with this approach, we're neglecting to explore other areas of criminal justice which could be improved, where racial inequality is alleviated, where trust with law enforcement and robust collaboration of law enforcement and community could be really restored. And I'm fearful, concerned that this approach, this bill, is going to lead us into a vicious cycle of more intense riots, followed by more intense militarized police response to repress them. That's kind of the direction I see this going, and that's why I'm unfortunately unable to support this bill. Most importantly, I have a lot of questions about qualified immunity. I'm thankful that I think there's at least one person who has a good grasp on what this term actually means and how it might apply. So I do agree with Representative Bohannon's remarks and a lot of things she said. The way it reads in the bill is the right, privilege, or immunity secured by law was not clearly established at the time of the alleged deprivation, or at the time of the alleged deprivation, the state of the law was not sufficiently clear that every reasonable employee would have understood that the conduct alleged constituted a violation of the law. That's a nice run-on sentence that'll be in our code books. I would love to see someone explain to me what that means and how it'll apply in real life. I think that would be an important thing for the people of Iowa to hear, is what does that sentence mean and how is it going to apply in real life, and why do we have this language? Why do we feel it necessary to shield our government, our beloved state of Iowa, from additional accountability? And there was a case. This was reported, I read it in the Des Moines Register and the Cedar Rapids Gazette, so it might not be totally true. But recently, I read that the Eighth Circuit Court out of Minneapolis, I believe, they ruled that University of Iowa administrators don't have qualified immunity when violating First Amendment rights, that they can be held accountable. And I believe, thank goodness, the court ruled this way, because absolutely, if a government official, whether it's a police officer or someone at the University of Iowa, is suppressing what I believe are sacred First Amendment rights, what I believe are sacred religious freedoms, then yes, absolutely, that person should be held accountable by the people. And this language right now, we've done a lot in this chamber to address the free speech concerns at the University of Iowa. But this language now is actually going to protect the University of Iowa administrators and make sure that they're going to get off scot-free if they do decide or inadvertently end up violating someone's First Amendment or Fourth Amendment or who knows what else. And this is what's very interesting, is this qualified immunity is not applying just to law enforcement in this bill. It's applying to all state employees. So there's a lot of really interesting examples of how this could apply. And again, I don't know. That's why I'm voting no on the bill, because I haven't been able to get an actual, real, precise and concise explanation of what the heck that very vague run-on sentence that I read. And from talking to some of my colleagues, I'm sure there are other people that are also confused on how qualified immunity language read. And I don't know if it was discussed that, are we including this language in this bill in response to the Eighth Circuit judicial ruling that said the University of Iowa the administrators could be held accountable for First Amendment violations? How does this apply in other areas? How does this apply with a child protective services agent misreporting some paperwork or misremembering a conversation that leads to a child being taken from a home? How would this relate to a health official that recommends an invasive medical treatment that hasn't been tested on pregnant women, but say that all pregnant women need to take it anyway? Is that person going to face any liability if it ends up that serious fertility concerns come from something like that? And that's more of a realistic hypothetical, that I think there are people in the state of Iowa that might be going down this direction, where there could be things that are very questionable, where the qualified immunity provision would protect them from any accountability whatsoever. And again, I just don't understand the need, because I haven't researched this entirely. I'm not the expert here, but I would love to see some lawsuits of law enforcement officers who have been punished by lawsuits that have either been frivolous or not grounded in reality, where in actuality there was a damaging effect to law enforcement. If we're including this language in the bill because we want to protect our law enforcement officers from lawsuits, I would like to see some evidence that is showing that this is a problem that needs to be addressed in Iowa. Because I'm not sure that it is. I feel like it would have been more newsworthy, and I haven't really heard of anything. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong. I would love to actually have a discussion so I could better learn about what the heck qualified immunity is, why it's necessary, how it applies, and why it's worded so broadly. And I heard the Attorney General's office was included in drafting the language. Anyway, that's, again, just very perplexing to me, and I think there's a lot of people that I think Iowans would benefit from a more robust discussion of what actually would be the impact of codifying qualified immunity. And again, I think that University of Iowa example, just Google that, Eighth Circuit Court, University of Iowa, First Amendment, and you can read the same articles that I perused. And the court said it, that yeah, if a state employee is violating someone's constitutional rights, that there are times when the qualified immunity, which has been more often than not the reigning judicial ruling or precedent, doesn't apply. Anyway, I hope some of that made sense, because I don't claim to know what I'm talking about, which is why I'm voting no on the bill. But anyway, I would love to talk further, and I'd love to call people up and ask questions, but I don't think we have so much time for that. I know we're time certain tonight. which I think is unfortunate because I think there's a lot more here to debate in all phases of this, from criminal justice systems, from our public schools, and how are these youth getting into trouble. I think we need some really serious exploration, a lot of different
Shipley,
issues.
your time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Really appreciate it.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Lynn, Representative